The One Book, One Putnam Committee is a group of volunteers who support literacy and reading throughout Putnam County. We also choose a community read each year. Our selection for 2015 is The Creek by Jody Gleason. JT writes about his childhood growing up in the rural community of Cross Creek, located in southeastern Alachua County, a tight-knit hamlet of moss-draped trees nestled between two beautiful lakes. Welcome. My name is Bob Lee, and I'm a member of the One Book, One Putnam Committee. I'm standing on the front lawn of Marjorie Kinnans Rawlings' home, now an historic state park. Miss Rawlings is best known for writing Southern rural fiction. Her most noted work is The Yearling, the Pulitzer Prize-winning young adult novel published in 1938. The story is about a young boy named Jody Baxter who adopts a fawn that becomes his best friend. Jody's character is modeled on a real boy. That boy was Jody Gleason, who happened to live just down the road. When JT was 54, he wrote The Creek, a memoir of his life living in Cross Creek from the 1920s through the 1950s. By the time JT had penned his book, he led a life that had all the elements of a Hollywood movie script. He made his living as a commercial illustrator, painter, and theme park conceptual designer. He was also a sculptor, aviator, and an explorer. And now we're going to get a chance to meet JT and learn a little more about him. He lives just over there, beyond Miss Rawlings' home and on the other side of Orange Lake, in the community of Evanston, about a 20-minute drive from here. Okay, we're in JT Glisson's house in Evanston, Florida, and JT, we're proud to be here and to listen to some of your stories about your life and your experiences growing up in Cross Creek. What would be the difference back then, growing up in Cross Creek, a rural, almost a primitive community, compared to today?
I was born in the T-model era.
Okay.
My folks had come from Georgia, looking to live in Florida. My folks settled at Cross Creek, and a year later, Ms. Rawlings and her husband Charles moved into the house, their house there, and he was interested in the citrus. They were there for a few years, 3 or 4 years, and he got the citrus back to going. He and my father found that with horse and wagons working, that one man singly were trying to work a grove, was in and out of the wagon and all that sort of thing. So they liked one another the day they met, and so they decided to work his and ours simultaneously. And they also, my dad knew about fishing and so forth, so they would slip off and go on the lake and fish a while. Miss Rawlings didn't know about that.
But how were they perceived when they first moved there? I mean, were they, because they weren't from that locale? How were Marjorie and Charles, her husband?
Charles Rawlings is a great personality. Everybody liked Charles Rawlings. I think ever met him. Mm-hmm. And so he became friends with everyone in the area. My dad asked him, "What does your wife do?" And he said, she's wanting to write and she's trying to get started in that. Charles Rawlings was publishing in Saturday Evening Post and the most popular magazine.
So he was a big-time writer himself.
Yes, he was. And she was going to be. Mm-hmm. And my dad met her a couple of times. It was hello, and that was it. But my dad and Charles Rawlings was great buddies. One day after I was born, I was up big enough that I said, I notified my folks of anyone coming down the road to Cross Creek, because it was only the mailman came lots of days. And so I said that Mr. and Ms. Rawlings is both coming down the road walking towards us. And they got there, and I said hello, and they came in, and Mr. Rawlings said, I wanted to speak to your folks for a minute, and we don't have much time. So he said, if you could, would you ask them to come out front? And so they came out. He stuck out his hand and shook hands with my dad and said, Tom, you're as close a friend as I've ever had. But me and Marjorie he said, we've agreed that I'm going to be leaving the creek and she's going to be staying home. And what I wanted to do was to ask you, he said, everyone here has been hospitable and so forth, and Marjorie loves the creek. She wants to stay here. And I'd appreciate if you pass the word among all the locals that there's no hard feelings with us. And I'll be going my way, and she'll be here from now on.
I understand that Marjorie and your dad had a complicated relationship.
Oh, yes, yes.
Why don't you share some of that with us?
She would come getting advice or stuff about one thing or another. And but every now and then, some local or someone would tell her some yarn, which they seem to love to do. And so all at once, she would be furious at my dad. And she would get in her car. She always never had a car more than 2 years old from time Charles left. And she would come up and skid brakes at our house and get out, and my dad would come to the door, and she would tell him he was so-and-so and you this and you that, and he found it amusing. And my mother would say, you egg her on, darn it, she's by herself now, and you're just egging it on. And he said, hell, we don't have much entertainment at the creek. And so never more than 2 or 3 days later, she would be walking, and I'd say, my dad, Miss Rawlings is walking up the road. He says she's coming to apologize. And she'd come up and stick her hand out and say, Tom, made a damn fool out of myself, and so forth. And he said, it's all right. Every now and then you got to entertain yourself. And he said, it's kind of dull at the creek anyway. And she would go back on great good terms. Her and my mother was always on good speaking terms.
How far did Ms. Rawlings like to walk every day? I understood she liked to take a walk.
She walked to Big Hammock.
And tell us about that walk. I understood she was in one kind of a mood when she was going out,
yes,
in a different mood coming back.
She, in fact, her days, as from the outside view, from my view, was that she did not prepare her breakfast. She had breakfast in bed every morning. Whoever was working there fixed breakfast.
She liked to be pampered.
With the tray that she raised up against the pillows, and the tray was put, and she ate her breakfast. When she had finished breakfast, she would look at some papers or one thing and another. And the mail carrier came about 11:15, and she would be up in time and go out to the mailbox. No, she wouldn't go to the mailbox. She would go out on the porch, and the mail carrier come. She wouldn't, I think, lose her statute to go out and meet the mailman. She would wait until he stopped, put it in the mailbox. As he pulled off, she then went out to the box. And I think she had her little private, the rest of the world, at the mailbox. She would stand there and look through her letters and everything else.
She didn't want the mailman seeing her.
The mailman didn't.
She would have preferred that the mailman actually walk up to her door, maybe.
Oh, I'm sure she would. But dad had a knack of recognizing where there was money, you could make money.
Sure.
So he told the fisherman that, well, first he told my mother he was going to go up for a few days in Georgia, he'd be back. And he went up in South Georgia, in Valdosta and Macon and so forth. And back then they were hauling fish from the Gulf, saltwater fish, to Georgia. And he told them that I will sell you freshwater fish. Well, the Georgia people knows about freshwater fish and they're highly preferred.
Oh, yes.
So their trucks, when they came down, there was a different thing about Cross Creek back then. It was legal when he started everything, but you didn't talk about things that was good and so forth. Where I went to school, I never told anybody my dad was in the fish business or my dad was in the cattle business. Or
because some of the fish business was on the right side of the law, and other kinds of the fish
later,
business were
they
on the left
passed
side.
a law. The sports fishermen would come out, and the commercial fishermen were out there working around the lake with their little traps, going back and forth. And of course, a sports fisherman, I've never met one that will admit he didn't know how to catch any. He come the wrong time of day, the wrong time of moon, used the wrong time of bait, and too big a hook, and all that sort of thing. But if he didn't catch any, he saw those little commercial boats easing around
And he
out
got
there,
mad.
and they caught them all. And so they got the legislature to pass a law that it was illegal to trap or seine on Orange, Loch Loosa, and Noonan's Lake. That was before anywhere else in Florida it was against the law. And
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so when you first got there, basically everything was legal.
yes,
Okay, so primarily you were trapping catfish, speckled perch, brim, bass.
brim, speckled perch were the main thing.
Okay, and so what kind of commercial fishing devices would you have used back then?
Out of poultry wire, we made traps.
A double funnel fish trap?
Yes, you can get 11 traps out of a roll of poultry wire.
Did you coat them in anything, or did you just use them? Did you coat the wire? No, I guess you wouldn't have coated them back then.
Oh, no.
Because today
they were
they could-
galvanized, and
Okay.
we left it in the water from the time you got it made and put it out there.
What kind of bait would they have used?
Originally, it was amazing to me that the lake had freshwater shrimp. We never knew it.
Grass shrimp.
Nobody ever recognized it. So we used beef heart, earthworms.
But you would have put the worms in a little something, mesh or something to keep them in the trap, right? Or
No.
no. You're talking about
we did them on cat lines, on the
Got it.
hooks.
trot lines. Right.
Earthworms, and in the traps there was brim. The fishermen, everything at Cross Creek you met on the bridge, the old
Yes.
steel bridge that
Yes.
was there then, and because mosquitoes would eat you up in the daytime most anywhere else,
That you tried to have a meeting,
but in the sun, the bridge was in the sun, and
and that's why you had the meetings.
the meeting was held on the bridge, and they would pass the word that, hey, we got something I think we need to talk about. And the state made it illegal. And the state, though, hired political people to be game wardens.
Mhm.
And at least 3 years passed, and they hadn't caught one fisherman.
Which was good for you.
Oh, of
And your
course,
dad.
of
Yeah,
course. And in fact, it was a fun and games thing. When I was growing up, I didn't play cowboy and Indians. We played fisherman and game warden. And so it was a way of life at the creek. And the
Yeah, we're
fish-
talking about the bridge and settling disputes.
well, they meet on the bridge and decide on what we did. They pointed out early on when the state first decided to pass the law that Jesus went out and helped
seine the fish.
John,
Lake
Saint,
Gallery.
John, actually it wasn't, it was Peter, St. Peter. He helped St. Peter pull a seine. He walked on the water and helped him pull a seine, and nobody in Tallahassee was going to tell the fishermen at Cross Creek there was something wrong about it.
Right. It was in the Bible, therefore it was
Of course,
correct.
it was correct. And there wasn't any sense of guilt. But as the years went on, this developed into just the most wonderful program that could go, because the state finally realized they couldn't catch anyone. And there was fishermen there all the time. In fact, my dad had brought in several families of new fishermen. And so they decided to hire some locals as game wardens.
Uh-oh.
Well, it's okay. They certainly would not have taken the job without the community's permission. And so they would come down to the fish house in the morning when they're bringing fish into ice. And they would come down and they say, you know, I'm down in the back and my young'uns and all, and they've offered me a job as a warden, and I won't take it unless you fellas what y'all think. We're a family out here. And so everybody say, well, I guess somebody's got to be one, so might as well be you. So to catch a fisherman and charge him with illegal fishing, you had to tag him. If you didn't,
physically tap him.
that's right. And if he run, you got to run until you catch him and tag him or lose him.
I understand.
And so playing fisherman and game warden was the most fun thing that could be for a young person.
Tell us about that first night that you worked a lookout. And how old would you have been when you were a lookout that night?
When I was a lookout that night, I was probably 9 or 10. Name's well,
Okay.
too.
Was there something on that first night that you were a lookout? Was there something that happened that night?
Oh, yes.
Did you almost get found out, or did the game warden almost?
Oh, man, I like
What happened that night?
What happened was they finally let me, I didn't have to be at the creek. I could be on the hill. If you weren't in the water, if you were on the hill and they were pulling the seine out there, they couldn't bother you.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing was the water was high on Bird Island. It was hard to define where the hill was. But I was back in the woods there. I learned if you're a watchman, you didn't slap mosquitoes, even though they were terrible. You like this, because if you wave this way, the wardens, if they were coming up on the backside, they'd see you.
Even if it was dark, because the lake was illuminated.
Exactly.
They were behind.
Even with just the stars,
they would see your silhouette.
Yes.
And the illumination of the brighter lake.
Yes.
Okay.
So you learned that you did like this with mosquitoes, and we had an old shotgun that, like even back at the mouth of the creek, if a strange boat come through or anything, you'd shoot one time and count to 60 and shoot again. And then they would take the seine out of the water and wait for the wardens to come. The fish was, when they got them in that pocket tight, they were just raising hell, man. Yeah. We got a lot of them, man. We're doing it tonight. And so I got excited and I waded out into the lake a little bit so I could see better. And the wardens pulled really a new one. They had borrowed 2 Evinrude. They were only 18 horse, but they were as big as your car engine, back then.
Right.
And they had got these 2 big motors, and they had stuck onto the lake, and they had picked up that we were right there with the seine.
Yes, sir.
And they got past the watchman. They'd probably been there a couple of days, and before the watchman was put out. So at any point, I'm watching them, and they're getting all the fish, and then you can hear them just roar, and the fish making noise. And all at once, Florida field on homecoming night would be dull compared to big lights going on, big old searchlights came on, and the motors was coming, and there was no motors on the lake then. And
That was a clue.
this is the most exciting thing that ever happened across creek. And with me, I'm standing there with my mouth hanging open. I couldn't believe it. They come roaring in, and two of the two that was working the seine, in fact, including CJ, come by and said, "Run, JT, run!" And I'm standing there like an idiot. But what happened was, before they came by me, they hit into that seine with those motors. The boats went upside down. There was lights going in every direction, all over the place. And then I suddenly realized that they were running, and I'm still standing there like a fool. And the CJ and them went by me and said, "Run, JT, run!" And I thought, yeah. And I looked, and a warden was no more than just 10 foot from me coming. And I had learned you don't drag your feet when you're running. You step high, and
So you don't.
so you don't
trip.
Yeah, that's right. You don't drag. You outrun somebody that way. And I'm doing everything right, but he was staying with me. And I was trying to get down far enough that I could cut up on the high part of the island where the scrub palmettos were and all that. And I'm running for dear life to get down to where I could cut in. And one of these old...
Now you're running in the dark now.
oh, yes. But,
No lights.
That's right, but you see better than you think, especially when you're running.
But you knew the island well anyway.
Oh, yes, I know everything on the island. So vine that's native down here called a bamboo vine that has sharp thorns about this far apart. They're real strong vines, and they're usually in the edge of a hammock or somewhere. And I'm running full tilt. He's behind me, and suddenly I ran into one of those darn vines, and you don't break them, and my feet went out from under me. And I rolled around getting up, but he ran into the same vine. And man, I was up and out going across the island. I'm running for dear life. And all at once, somebody came up out of the palmettos and grabbed me and said, "Stay down, JT," and took off running. It was CJ. What happened was, he knew the warden would probably catch him. He thought it was fun running from a warden. So
apparently he was pretty adept at it.
Oh, yes. The warden didn't know that we changed who he was
because
chasing.
CJ had been chased before.
He was chasing me
okay.
before, and CJ knocked me down, and he jumped. He went then ran, and the warden.
Right, but CJ had already run from the wardens. He's pretty good at running from the wardens.
Oh, yeah, it had happened before. Yes, a number of times. In fact, he knew who the warden was. They were neighbors.
Now let me
but
ask
you did have to pay a fine if you were caught. You paid a fine, but at Cross Creek we passed the hat, and everybody kicked into the fine. And
well, that was nice.
It kept anybody from being hurt.
Well, let me ask you about one thing. I understand there was one night, maybe it was the night you're talking about, where the game wardens, the fishermen didn't feel like the game wardens had played a fair game. And then they came together at the bridge, correct me if I'm wrong, to discuss this.
Yes. In fact, this was such entertainment that every time there was a chase on the lake, the next morning, of course, running in those hammock woods and all, you got scratched up a little bit and so forth. Everybody got home and slept 2 or 3 hours. And in the morning at 10 o'clock, you met the game wardens on the bridge.
Okay.
Because it was like after the football game
you had to talk
last
about
night.
it after the two opposing sides.
That's right. We met on the bridge, and it was, "Hello, how are you, and how's your wife and your kids," and so forth. And I would be thinking, get to the chase, But it had to go on through all of this greeting thing, and they would finally get around. Somebody would say, "I understood there was a hell of a chase on Loch Glisson last night at Burn Island or wherever." And the fishermen would say there was, and the wardens would start describing what happened. And everybody, of course, didn't know nothing about it, but they would every now and then ask him, "Did you get one? Do you see one of the guys?" And the warden wouldn't say who he was. He would say, "Yeah, I was close to one of them."
Was there ever a time where the fishermen felt like the game wardens hadn't played fair and they had to talk about it at the bridge?
Warden, one of them, with all skin scratched up. Everybody got scratched up and scrub palmettos and one thing and another. But one of the wardens was really bashed up good with a black eye. And he said, "There's one thing that I want to get settled right here this morning." He said, "Somebody put a damn tripwire on Burnt Island last night and damn near busted my jaw and my shoulder and so forth." I was over there the night that it happened. And they said, whichever one of you it is, be man enough to step out here and I'm going to whoop you right here on the bridge. And some of the ones said, "Well, that shouldn't be necessary. Now, we've always been able to get along and agree and so forth." And he's no hell, he wanted to whoop somebody. And so finally, somebody said, my dad was down there, my dad said that, to the warden, he said, "Sir," he said, "you're right." He said, "It was unfair. The wire was." And he said, "I think we'll all agree that we won't have any tripwires anymore." And everybody said okay, and the warden said okay, and we're all friends again.
So the bridge was kind of a substitute for the courthouse? Would that
It
be
was
correct?
for any business to do with Cross Creek.
For Cross Creek?
Yes.
And the reason you met there was to keep away from mosquitoes?
Mosquitoes, it was a common place everybody knew to go. And the little kids would pass the word to everybody around in the woods and so forth that we're going to meet on the bridge on Saturday morning.
So by listening to you, because us driving over here, the land seems to be, I would imagine it's more clear than it was back then. This was a deep hammock, lots of shade.
They've just cleared several thousand acres over along the Loch Loosa all the way up in there.
Okay.
And go into the creek and out of here. When
Let me ask you this. What did you think when you first found out that Miss Rawlings used a character for Jody in the Urine? Jody Baxter.
Miss Rawlings was my buddy. I could tell her anything and everything that
She was your confidant.
Absolute confident. Had no fear of her ever telling something. And so I told her everything that ever happened. And
Like what, for instance? Can you give us one example of one of these activities you didn't want your mom and dad to know about?
Oh, well, that had to do with courting and Hawthorne.
So she gave you
advice
on romance.
Well, and so one or two occasions a lot later. And but that was a part of it. With her, she would go for her walk that you mentioned before.
Yes.
She'd come out the gate and she didn't want to be bothered with anything. Other people going down the road in a car would stop and pick you up. You don't leave somebody walking and drive by. They would stop, and of course she was out for the exercise. Sure. and so forth. And the second car stopped, she would be very impolite towards them. And the word passed that don't bother her when she's walking that way. So when she was coming back, I would meet her or be doing things, and I would walk with her and we'd talk about everything back to the house. And
She was more relaxed on the way
oh,
back.
on coming back, she
Heading
was
for the
totally
barn, she was-
relaxed. There's no time limit on anything. Frequently back at the house, I went inside with her and got something out of the refrigerator. She had weird things in there, things that we didn't have at Cross Creek. In fact, I found some stuffed olives on one occasion in there. With
That
a
was
little
new to you folks,
orange thing. Oh, we didn't have them in our house.
Was that fancy food?
Oh, it was fancy to me. I got a handful of them. I put one in my mouth, and I thought it was candy. And oh, most awful tasting thing I'd ever touched in my life. I put the rest in my pocket and threw them out in the orange grove later. But she was a big buddy.
And when did you? When Miss Rawlings came to your class, tell us about that. What grade would that have been, though?
That was when I was a junior in high school.
Okay.
And I should have been a senior, but I had some subjects that I hadn't enough to be over all the way and so forth. And the teachers in Hawthorne, Miss Rawlings won the Pulitzer Award and all of that. The teachers in Hawthorne, there was no talking about there's a Pulitzer winner at Cross Creek.
It kind of went over their head.
That's exactly it. Nothing could be at Cross Creek. It amounted to much, and including me. And this teacher one day was desperately trying to find, she was college level, and the kids were bored to death. They're looking out the window and they're playing things and got games going and all. And of course, we know, the kids know she's trying to find something to reach us. And here in Florida, down the state, there is a lady there that knows this country and beautifully capable. And she started telling about an area of the book, Cross Creek. She didn't get the fifth word said before everyone in the class knew she's talking about Cross Creek and she don't know where it is. So it was everybody, nobody, the girls will tell, don't nobody say anything. One day I came up with the idea that if she would come to Cross Creek, that I could swap that for the rest of me getting out of high school.
Miss Rawlings.
And I told her, I said, we know where Miss Rawlings lives about it.
Great.
And so I said, I want you to come and give us a talk. I didn't know what a lecture was. And so she said when. She didn't even ask me. I told her tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. And I got out of school all morning sort of waiting for her. And when she come, I told her, I said, you don't have to say much. It never occurred to me that it would be interesting. It had nothing to do with it. I just wanted to get it over with, and I was going to get in the military, and the world was going to be good. And so I told Miss Rawlings to come in and introduced her to Mr. Benson. He weighed 300 pounds. You didn't fool with him. And but anyway, he welcomed her, but when he shook her hand, he reached to take his hand back, and Miss Rawlings held him. And he said, is something the matter? And she said, yes, I want to be sure you understand our arrangement. And he said, what arrangement? And he told him, JT will pass whatever problems he's got, and he's going into the Air Corps and be a pilot. And Mr. Benson's, he knew me, and he looked at me with that look like, damn you. And he said, Well, it ended all the kids are already in the auditorium, and with a vacancy for Ms. Rawlings and the principal right in the center, and a couple of trustees up there. And Ms. Rawlings walked down and looked up, and she said, "No, no, please, no. I hate stages." She said, "I'm frightened of stages. And the truth is, I came to talk to the children. If you don't mind, I'd like to stay down here among them." She was a natural at anything. Ms. Rawlings came out with a pack of Camels and lit one with a big match. Only time they've tore the building down, I'm sure it's the only cigarette lit in the history of the building. Ms. Rawlings said to the kids, "I'm as interested in you as you are in me." And she said, "I would like you to ask me some questions, and I will ask you some maybe, and we'll just do it that way." And so the first question was, "Oh, Ted, how much they pay you for one of them books like yours?" And she explained to him about residuals and so forth, and the whole thing. What did she do to get a book published? And she said, "You sent it off, and they paid you residuals, and you got royalties for it." They wanted to know how much she got, and she told them. But she was able to handle that full auditorium with like 300 kids.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's kind of switch a little bit. Still on Mrs. Rawlings, though.
Yeah.
Let's pretend for a moment we could turn the clock back, and we could come back into her time, and she is still alive and vibrant, and she knew that JT had written and published The Creek. What do you think that she would say?
She would congratulate me. She always did on anything I did. She would never sour grapes on something. If I had shown her the script before I got it published, she probably would have maybe have suggested some suggestions, but she didn't.
Okay, JT. So you were talking earlier about your manuscript. I understand that you worked on that manuscript while flying back and forth to South America on 12-hour flights. What were you doing in South America?
I checked here back in the States, and
Nobody else had been down the river?
Nobody had done this river.
Do you remember the name of the river?
Yes, it's
Okay.
It's the Monso. It has another name when it gets into Chile, but it's the Monso.
Now, is this a big long river?
It's not really a big long river. It runs about 50 miles down, going south, parallel to the Andes. And I went into National G in Jacksonville, in Washington.
National Geographic
Yes, in Washington, yes. And they had nothing on the Monso River in Argentina or Chile. So I then went and met the editor of National Geographic, and I told him what I was interested in, and he said that they would finance me.
So I know you, JT, that you made, I guess, a good portion of your living, for lack of a better way to describe it, as a painter and an illustrator. Tell us about that, but tell us where you got your training. Where you learned to be an artist. Where were you trained?
Actually, the word talent is the most misused word in the world. God didn't sprinkle some dust on me and you didn't get any. That's pure baloney. So I was lucky enough to be born with club feet. No one in my family was ever accused of being artistic or anything like that. I was in a Shrine Hospital and there's nothing else that you can do with a kid, give him stuff to draw and paint on.
Okay.
So when I was old enough back home to go into first grade, I immediately showed everybody how good I drawed, and I was ahead of them by miles. And so somebody said I was talented. I didn't know what that was, but it sounded good. And so I drew all the more, learning practically nothing but demonstrating my art.
You've had an amazing life.
My wife and I had moved, when we moved in this house here, we had moved 22 or 23 times.
Oh my gosh.
Goodness.
And we moved here. I had a contract doing a grant at UF, and I was born right across the lake, you know. So, like all sorry husbands, I told her, you go find a place you like. We had 5 kids and a dog. And so we were living in Leesburg, I think, then, or somewhere. And she came up and came back, and my mother, who was over at the creek, they found this house. And they come back, and I didn't care what it was. That contract was only for a year. And but I came up, and I've been here 2 or 3 days. There's no pavement out here. This all has been built since then. And I was walking out there around the oak tree, and I thought, you know, for the first time since I was a kid at Cross Creek, I feel comfortable here. And so